My initial plan was to watch it and share the good and the bad, help you all decide if you want to watch it or not. But now that I've actually seen it, what I really need is to vent my frustrations to people who will understand. It was so bad. This is the Jane Austen podcast. I'm your host, Becky, and today we're talking about the Netflix Persuasion. I want to start by taking a moment to talk about the novel. Persuasion is a story written by a middle aged Jane Austen who, despite romantic opportunities in her younger days, had chosen a single life. By the time Jane began to write what would be her final completed work, she had suffered financial difficulties, been displaced from her home, grieved the deaths of several beloved family members and friends, and seen through her brothers' families the hardship of life in the Navy. And all of these personal experiences are poured into her writing in this novel. The young, spirited author of the satirical Northanger Abbey had grown into a much more mature artist who had spent her life studying people, who understood the depth of human emotion. When I think of this novel, the words that come to mind, words that I use when I recommend it to people, are quiet, gentle, soft. It's one of her shorter completed works, but its subtle storytelling packs a punch, and I think that's why it's the favorite for so many people. Listen, certain things are just sacred, and Persuasion and Anne Elliot are a couple of those things. Which is why it was so hard to watch this beloved piece of literature be transformed like Play Doh in the hands of a child into a poorly conceived comedy that lacked depth and made a mockery of a heroine so inspiring to many. A lot of people who watched the trailer commented that Dakota Johnson's character seemed much more like a Lizzie Bennet than an Anne Elliot, and she was, but worse. This drunken Anne Elliot is clumsy, outspoken, witty, and flirtatious. She shows open disdain for her family members, even playing pranks on her younger sister. I think the movie justifies her rude behavior because, of course, her father and sisters are pretty unpleasant back to her, but she comes across as kind of a jerk. Just one more of Sir Eliot's three unpleasant daughters. And seeing her so forward and strong willed at the beginning of the movie begs two questions. For one thing, what story arc is waiting for her if this is how she begins? And second, how did this very independent version of the character get talked out of marrying Captain Wentworth in the first place? I don't really see that happening. In fact, Captain Wentworth even says to her, "You've never had any trouble speaking for yourself." Excuse me, what? The whole point of the story is that she let others determine what was best for her, and it cost her the love of her life. When we begin reading Persuasion, we do not meet an Anne Elliot who has never had any trouble speaking for herself. Quite the opposite. Also, I get how this fit in with the tone that the movie was going for, but it was frankly very upsetting to see such a dignified and mature heroine squatting to pee in the woods, completely hungover at the breakfast table, and babbling about some weird octopus dream that concludes with her discovery that she was, quote, sucking my own face. Anne deserves better, and Netflix should be ashamed. It was clear that they were trying to make her into a strong, modern woman, which was why I found it strange that they took almost every example of her strength away from her. It is Lady Russell who offered suggestions to alter the family finances. Anne doesn't really have anything to do with it, which in the novel that kind of establishes her as the mature one of the family, the responsible one, the only one willing to sacrifice and give up some of their luxuries. Anne Elliot's character may be a more passive protagonist. This isn't a novel about her going out and doing lots of great things. Jane Austen establishes her at the very beginning as a strong character. And this strength is just shown in the painful but powerful restraint that she shows throughout the novel. In the movie, she shows no dignity or resolve at all when she is reintroduced to Captain Wentworth. She's always forced into helping her family, usually seemingly annoyed, rather than serving them out of the goodness of her heart. In the novel, we see her choosing to uphold an engagement with an impoverished friend rather than break it to spend time with her noble cousins, which speaks to her integrity and character. But that whole storyline is removed from the movie. Even when Louisa has her accident, this is Anne's big moment to shine as a person who stays calm in an emergency. It's all over so quickly, we don't really see her do anything more than send someone for a doctor. Instead, we see her drinking in excess, crying in the bathtub, apparently a common occurrence for her. She has no control of herself or her life. Frankly, she's pretty pathetic and just not very likable. There's one scene that bothered me so much because it was so out of character. Anne is this quiet person. There's a part where she talks about how she's staying with the Musgroves, who are friends. They really like her and she really loves them, but she's kind of surprised that none of them ask her about her family moving away from Kellynch Hall or that whole situation, and she just realizes, "Oh, I'm just kind of a background character here," and she's okay with that. She accepts it in the novel. And that's who she is throughout the whole thing. She's just this quiet person. All these crazy things are happening around her, and these characters are having their experiences and talking about all these things, and she's just kind of there. In the movie, there's this part where they're all at dinner with the Musgroves, and in front of Captain Wentworth and everyone, she just announces, Charles wanted to marry me before he got engaged to Mary, to her sister. The Anne Elliot of the novel would never, she would never, one, bring attention to herself in that way, two, try to bring anyone else down. It was so awkward. It was so uncomfortable. And it was just so bizarre. It was such a strange character choice. I think that really clinched it for me, the understanding that whoever wrote this movie had no understanding of who this character really was. And Captain Wentworth is not that great either. He's very boring. I just don't buy it that the whole Musgrove family is enamored by him. His performance lacks the charm that we are repeatedly told that he has. This is a common theme throughout this movie that they tell you someone is a certain way, but they don't ever show it. They show you the opposite, actually. I can't really blame Cosmo Jarvis for this portrayal. I think the blame lies more in the script and the direction for his character. In the movie, Anne tells us that she would prefer, quote, open hostility from him rather than his cold politeness and ceremonious grace. But up to that point, he hadn't really behaved with any politeness or grace. He was kind of rude to her, actually. And where the novel Wentworth talks with Louisa Musgrove about weaknesses of character that Anne recognizes as his view of her, in the movie, he is openly disparaging of her to the point that Louisa chastises him and has to defend her friend. The relationship between Anne and Wentworth is kind of bizarre and completely lacks chemistry. I don't believe that these two people ever loved each other enough to spend 8 years nursing hopelessly broken hearts. Dakota Johnson's Anne Elliot has far more chemistry with Henry Golding's Mr. Elliot, but at no point was I the least bit concerned that she would end up with him instead of Wentworth. In the novel, she's suspicious of his attentions, and the grand reveal at the end is that rather than making a genuine connection with her family, he just wants to prevent Mrs. Clay from marrying into the family and producing an heir that would take everything away from him. As readers, we are gripped. We sense that something is off with him, but we don't know what. And when Anne thinks that Captain Wentworth and Louisa will be married, you begin to think, to worry that Mr. Elliot has arrived as the alternative for her happy ending. In the movie, when Anne meets him in Bath, she asks him why he's visiting her family, and he lays it all out for her. No intrigue, no shame. He's there to protect his interests. And she's okay with it. In fact, his disdain for her family only makes him more attractive to her. The whole movie is so rushed that the financial struggles are brushed past pretty quickly, as is the whole situation with Miss Clay. So maybe they were just trying to expedite getting that storyline out, but it left me confused as to his purpose in the story. And these are not the only characters who feel off. It's such a shame because the cast is honestly great. It was the one thing that left me hopeful after I had seen the trailer. Richard Grant as Mr. Elliot was a perfect choice. Ben Bailey Smith and Mia McKenna Bruce as Charles and Mary Musgrove should have been a good fit. The experienced as well as the new actors did a good job with what they had. Louisa Musgrove is played by Nia Towle, an actress who doesn't even have a picture up on her IMDb profile yet. But I thought she was very promising. I think they all could have done a great portrayal of the novel characters, but instead they were forced into the role of absurd caricatures. There's a part where Louisa instructs Anne in the art of catching a man, saying she should pretend to be so dumb she doesn't know how to use her fork and spoon. Which, in the moment, you hope is just playful banter between friends. But then we see Louisa sitting beside Captain Wentworth as he gives her a lesson in dining utensils. It's absurd. Mary Musgrove, who is a ridiculous person in the novel and seems like a great character to adapt to the screen, is over the top and a little too self aware to be convincing. Again, they're all about telling, not showing. So she tells the audience what her character is like. I need you to come so you can talk to me when nobody else will. Don't tell me that. Show me that. At one point, her great complaint is that she is an empath and feels too deeply. Now, Jane Austen wrote a whole novel about the concept of sensibility and feeling things too deeply. The behavior is nothing new, but to use such a modern term is jarring and pulls the audience out of the story. This interjection of modern colloquialisms is a problem throughout the whole movie. They were trying something and it just didn't work. Nothing that they tried really worked. They changed the plot, they changed the characters, they changed the words, and were left with something nearly unrecognizable as an Austen adaptation. They didn't even really give us good costumes. Can we please get Regency women in bonnets? That's all we want, okay? Enough with your ridiculous loose hair and stupid hats. Just give us bonnets. It was all just so misdirected. There have been many attempts to acclaim Jane Austen as this feminist icon, and it's clear that this movie was supposed to present us with a strong, modern woman as the protagonist. The whole thing is presented through the lens of modern feminism, yet it undercuts itself by cheapening everything that is good about this masterpiece. I always wonder what screenwriters are thinking when they make such significant changes to a classic work. Like, do you really think you know better than Jane Austen what will make this story work? The reason anyone will watch this movie, the reason I have created this podcast, the reason you are listening to it is because we all appreciate Jane Austen's genius. The novel Persuasion has its flaws, but it is a masterpiece. No one thinks of it as a comedy, but when you look at the characters, you see Jane's clever wit and her love of satire. The Elliots and the Musgroves are ridiculous people, self absorbed and shallow of feeling. This creates a perfect dichotomy against the deeply feeling Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth. They represent the maturity among a generally immature ensemble cast. Somehow, the novel, which again no one would describe as a comedy, manages to be funnier than this movie that was clearly aiming to be just that. Even though movie Anne Elliot chastises her sister for thinking every single woman must want a husband, trying to imply that there's more to life than just romance, the movie never bothers to explore more than the romantic aspects of the story. While Jane Austen's novels feature some of the greatest love stories of all time and always end with our protagonists marrying their great love, there's so much more to the novels than that. Some even debate whether her novels should be classified as mere romances. And I realize there are time constraints when you turn these complex stories into movies, so it's fine to just focus on the relationships, but then you can't awkwardly interject your Anne Elliot doesn't need no man philosophy. The whole movie is about her wanting and finally getting a man. The movie exchanges powerful, heart wrenching lines such as, now they were as strangers, worse than strangers, for they could never become acquainted. With the modern quip, now we're strangers, worse than strangers, we're exes. It's awful. We watch the Anne Elliots of other adaptations, endure one of the most painful experiences of their lives with incredible grace, their eyes full of the agony they cannot share. In this, Anne tells us she is absolutely heartbroken, but she's too busy rolling her eyes cleverly at the audience to ever seem really in pain. As I said, she is clearly supposed to be this strong female character, but she simply cannot cope with the challenges of life. And there's no emotional investment in her character. So when the story finally comes to that great climax when she reads Wentworth's letter, it just rings hollow. Where Jane Austen served us a feast, this movie offers up cheap fast food. It sounds appealing but doesn't satisfy. I don't think anyone unfamiliar with the novel would watch this movie and think, wow, I should read this book. Jane's work is so loved that there are countless adaptations in all genres and styles. Clueless, Bride and Prejudice, and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries are all great examples of fun modern versions. I'm not saying you can't be silly with her work. Frankly, she gives us plenty of material to be silly with. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And honestly, this version just comes across as disrespectful to an author who deserves more. And we as an audience deserve more. I actually don't have a Netflix account. I had to watch this with someone else, and watching it just made me feel justified in that decision. I'm happy to pay for my BritBox subscription on Amazon, and I will be using it tonight to watch the 1995 Persuasion because I think it will be healing after the trauma Netflix put me through. Thank you so much for listening. If you watched the movie, I would love to hear what you thought of it. If you're not going to watch it, I'd love to know your thoughts too. So leave a comment down below and we can talk about it. Don't forget to check out the other episodes of the podcast, all links in the description. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.